Welcome to another episode of the Shackcast. This is going to be episode 3 here, and our topic is the ultimate Superman video game. I'm your host, Aaron Shack64, and let me first start this week I released a video on YouTube talking about what Superman Returns did right. Now, I'll have a link to that video in the description here, and basically, it was just me going on a little rant where I was talking about what the video game of Superman Returns on the Xbox 360 did right. And we didn't really get into, too much of what the game did wrong, but the main idea was to highlight for future developers and other people considering games in this category, what they should look at and what should they do right. So in this podcast, I'm taking all my thoughts of what the ultimate Superman video game would be. How would it capture the character and the universe in the best way possible? Now, whether that is a possible vision, that's something we'll look at the end of the podcast here, if that is something we think that may be possible with today's technology. Because I will admit this is a lofty goal here. All right, so let's hit the first thing, and this is one of the first things that Superman Returns as a video game did right. The Metropolis health bar. So in Superman Returns, there was a health bar for the city rather than for Superman. Because Superman, for lack of a better term, is unkillable. He has died in comics and movies and stuff, but that's not the point of what we're getting at here. We're talking about a game that captures his power, is fun and engaging, and he doesn't die in little encounters, okay? It's usually a very big thing, and if we were to do it in the video game, we would want it to be connected to the story, not connected to failure. All right, so Metropolis health bar, making choices between fighting the threat and saving people. So if there is a threat here, some sort of big monster destroying Metropolis, then we're going to have to weigh the balance here of how many people are being attacked, Superman getting them to safety versus just eliminating the monster and, thus minimizing damage to the city that way. And then I've thought about this, about how he would juggle fighting the threat, saving people, and then, of course, Lois Lane is always into some trouble, so you would have to juggle that as well, and that could be triggered as a fail state as well. If you don't save Lois Lane, why even bother with the game? So there's that. But what I want to do to make the game more approachable from the start and to create sort of a progression here is that the difficulty scales with the Metropolis health bar. So what I mean by that is maybe at the beginning of the game, we're just doing small things like bank robbers and stuff. Okay, they're not really going to damage the city very much. Then maybe by the end, you're fighting Metallo, you're fighting General Zod, whatever. And then basically, as the difficulty scales, the amount of damage to the city scales. So as you learn to juggle all these systems of saving people, minimizing damage, putting out fires, with your freeze breath or whatever, and then going back and fighting the threat, this can progress and become more difficult over time, and it won't feel insurmountable to the player. You can still have your standard easy, medium, hard difficulty levels, but you can also have this scale over time to create sort of a, wow, I'm getting the hang of this game, and it still feels engaging and challenging even when maybe I have all the upgrades and abilities unlocked, right? So, I guess another thing I got to that I made note of here is that design of the city would need a bay area to dispose of bombs and fiery things, whatever it may be. It's not unusual to have a body of water to neutralize certain threats. Whether it's something that's on fire, something's going to blow up, it's very typical that in movies, TV shows, comics, they just throw it off into the water. So we would want to make sure that Metropolis has some sort of water surrounding it or near it that could work to that advantage. You would need mass destruction in this game, both indoors and outdoors, destructible buildings that you would fly through and throw enemies through and, try not to destroy completely, but, you would want to showcase some sort of amount of destruction. And of course, at some point that becomes too much and that becomes a fail state. But you want these battles to matter. You want things to feel big and you want the stakes to be high. And one of the ways that the movie Man of Steel portrayed the high stakes was the fight between Zod and Superman was very big. It destroyed a lot of buildings. You could tell the stakes were high. They were fighting for not just the future of Krypton, but the future of the Earth, whether humans would survive after this or whether there would be a civilization left. Okay, so this is the next thing. We often think of Superman as a character that can traverse the world very quickly, right? So in this case, to sort of adapt this to modern game development and just not making it to the point where we need to develop an entire Earth for him to fly on, just to be feasible here, you would have hub worlds. So what I mean by hub worlds is you'd have Metropolis as a place, probably the most largest area maybe would be, the big open world city, surrounding Bay Area, maybe some islands, however the city is designed. You would have that. Maybe you would have a countryside as well, so that you could lure threats outside of the city and fight there as well. The Fortress of Solitude would be another area, and the Fortress of Solitude would work as a tutorial area for combat simulations. You could also store the lore in the game there. Any sorts of collectibles, suits that you would have for Superman. If you wanted to change clothes, you would go there for any sort of customization of your character, listening to music from the game, viewing artwork. If you want to read lore, which I'm going to get more into how lore will be worked into the game later. Okay, and then space, of course, right? Sometimes Superman has been known to fly a nuke or a missile and throw it into space, or, fight various threats, whether it's a meteor shower or whatever it may be. He's been known to take things into space, and it makes sense for there to be combat there. So essentially, let's say that there's meteors falling from the sky, and Superman's in Metropolis. Let's say a couple of them come in, he blasts a few, he grabs the last one because it's really big, and then basically, instead of giving you the ability to fly everywhere, if you choose that you want to go to space, you fly up, and then at a certain point, you break the skybox, right? And then maybe it goes into some sort of a quick transition or cutscene that shows you flying with that object to space or something. Or creates a sensation of speed, even in first person, showing that you're flying out of Metropolis and in space. Okay, boom, you're loaded, you're in the space hub world now. And space could be really massive, right? Because there's not a lot there. We could have planets and solar systems in the background and stuff like that. And maybe some space stations or something, satellite, whatever it may be, roaming around out there. And then you could throw that meteor out there and blast it with a heat ray, or throw it into the sun or something, things like that. So that's an explanation of how hub worlds would work. So instead of just flying to the Fortress of Solitude, which we recognize is in some Arctic area that's far from Metropolis, at a certain point, you would either, I don't know, and maybe with the Fortress, you might just select it from a menu, but maybe you just fly in a certain direction for long enough, and then sort of the hub world transition takes over, and you get a cutscene of him flying across something really fast, and then, stops, and boom, we're at the Fortress of Solitude, and he lands, and then you're able to freely roam the fortress as you wish. Now, an interesting thing for the space, for going into space, I thought of it as a really cool idea, even as whether it's a pause menu or if they want you to fly up to space to access certain aspects of a pause menu, like an overhead map. I thought this would be really cool. Fly up into space, you look down at the Earth, and then you get the overhead map of Krypton. Maybe certain areas are highlighted red. You see different story quests or whatever. You see people calling for help, stuff like that. And you can do some auditory cues there where you could listen for calls of help and then, sort of follow that marker on the overhead map there. And as usual, combat would take place here and threats can be taken there if there's time. So if there isn't time, bomb's about to blow up, don't have time to fly it up into space, timer's got 3 seconds left. Okay, you fly it over to the bay and drop it in the ocean. All right. So on to the next thing, super stamina. Another thing that Superman Returns got right was essentially Superman would have stamina instead of health. After doing lots of exhaustive activities, using heat vision, all these things, using that too much, taking a bunch of hits, you become exhausted, and then you need to fly up to the sun and heal and essentially recover that stamina. So yeah, essentially healed by the yellow sun, right? So instead of a health bar, you have that, and that makes the game more fun. It still creates tension, it raises the stakes, but without the fail state. Because really, there's no fail state until Metropolis is destroyed. That is the weakness, or Lois Lane. That's really the fail states. That's when Superman becomes something unrecognizable, or he's just a failure at that point. So different suns on different planets could alter the gameplay. So if Superman were to travel to a different galaxy or whatever for purposes of the story, and there's a red sun, powers could be neutralized, could alter the gameplay. They could experiment with that as much as they want to within the lore of the character, and maybe DC would give them the ability to make up their own bounds there. So managing your powers versus the strength of your attacks, how hard your attacks hit, stuff like that. Knowing when it's time to go up and regen so that you're not knocked down on the ground, having to spend a couple precious seconds to get back up and then, sort of compose yourself and then fly up to the sun, fly up into the sky and be healed. So there was a button actually in Superman Returns, and if I remember right, it was like the Y button. That was a straight up like teleport to the sky type button, where it was if you were on the ground or you were flying low or whatever, you could just press Y and then you fly up a little bit, pretty much to the rooftops of the tallest buildings, about that height where you could access the sun and get your stamina back. It's just not necessarily a button that takes you all the way to space or ridiculously high that then you can't get back to the action quick enough. All right, so powers. Super hearing assists with the game's radar system. So much like how we talked about how you could fly up into space and listen for, people calling for help, you could do the same as you're in the city. So that would be audio cues. And then, of course, X-ray vision could work for that as well, depending. Now, X-ray vision could be utilized in specific ways, searching for bombs, other weapons, analyzing the scene like Batman's detective vision does. It tells him, okay, these guys are armed, these guys aren't, and then Batman can decide what to do within the Arkham games, right? So, could be used in a similar way for Superman and combat type stuff. It could be used to analyze threats and stuff like that, and you could really get creative there. And Superman, the Man of Steel, I believe, that came out in 2002, utilized that very well. The hearing and X-ray vision. So another thing about powers is that in the game, you should challenge the player to be creative with his powers. Like if there's a burning building, you could use freeze breath to eliminate the fire, or you could use your wind breath to push so much air that gets rid of the fire that way. You could also pick up a fire truck maybe and bring it up and have them spray the fire. You could get really creative as to how to solve that, and you know, whether you want to go in the building and pull out the civilians first, or you want to try to put the fire out, you know, depending on precious time, juggling loss with the, you know, the loss of life with making the right decisions. I mean, that's really what you want to do with a game of this magnitude. So yeah, just things like that could extinguish a fire quickly. You would also want to have all the main powers, right? The wind breath, the frost breath, the heat vision, the X-ray vision, strength, flight, speed. You know, and Superman Returns had this to varying extents of you could have a very targeted heat vision, or you could sort of make it a wider berth, but you would risk doing damage to the area. But it was good if you were fighting multiple enemies and you wanted to blast them all with one big breath of air or whatever. It kind of worked with all of the different powers of that sort. And so that was a really cool idea. So yeah, now on to flight. You want to simulate speed, breaking the sound barrier, that kind of thing. So that was something that Superman Returns did really well. You know, you could fly at sort of a calm, you know, gliding speed, and then you could push a button and then go into really fast mode. Things blur, you know, whooshing wind sounds, and then, you know, you break the sound barrier, and then you keep flying, and then it happens again, and you sort of, you know, break all these different speeds. So in Superman Returns, the map, I believe, was 80 square miles. So the map has to be big enough to allow for lots of flying, right? And for the game to feel massive, and you want to be fast, but you don't want to be too fast that in a blink of an eye you're hitting an invisible wall or something. So yeah, flying at different speeds, blurring the screen. Of course, when you fly near water, the water would react to that. Of course, flying underwater is a whole other thing that we'll talk about. You would definitely want your powers to have different levels of energy. So you'd want to be able to fly at these controlled speeds based on what the situation is. Hovering, running, jumping, you know, the instant fly up into the sky button is probably something worth keeping of some sort. And yeah, you want to keep ground movement, running and jumping and stuff like that, key to traversal. So even though Spider-Man can web swing in the games, they still give him the ability to jump really high and leap across buildings, and I feel like you kind of want that for Superman too. Alright, so music. You definitely listen. That's one of the things Superman Returns got wrong. And a lot of games have gotten wrong. The rights to the Superman theme from John Williams, the Man of Steel soundtrack even, was spectacular. And whether they want to do an OST for the game, that would be cool, an original soundtrack. But I think it's key to have things that he is recognized for. And I think the music would have to be really top-notch. It couldn't be some knockoff thing. You know, people are going to want to hear something epic. And they also want to hear what they know. So, alternate suits. Amongst the various unlockables, you would want to have alternate costumes. Superman Returns had a pod suit, which was that kind of white tight suit with no cape that he landed on Earth in after his journey to Krypton. Excuse me. Golden Age suit was also featured as well. So what I would want for this game would be to have the costumes accessed from the Fortress of Solitude. some sort of menu or area there, maybe a bunch of statues, mannequins that are wearing all the different Superman outfits. Superman Returns had a Bizarro mode where you got to play as Bizarro and you destroyed as much of Metropolis as you could within the time limit. So that was kind of a cool thing. And that could be something that returns with the suits. You know, the Bizarro suit could be an option. The Golden Age Superman could be an option. So some of my ideas for suits, you know, just fanboy out here. The Red Sun suit, you know, with the hammer and sickle would be cool. Even if they decide maybe they want to have Red Sun Superman show up in the story and maybe at the battle, and that could be cool too. And have the suit as an unlockable. The New 52 suit, obviously. Action Comics 1, you want to have the classic Superman suit, all the different ages of Superman. That'd definitely be cool. The black suit could be tied to story events and stuff. If the first game, or if this would be a trilogy, you know, you'd want to have a death of Superman at some point would be a really riveting thing to go through, and to have the black suit with the mullet and all that, that'd be pretty cool. A space suit of some sort could be a thing, if that's something. I know Superman is sometimes depicted as needing a spacesuit depending on who's riding, and other times, you know, he just flies up into space no problem. So it could be a thing where it's needed on a certain situation, key to the story. Maybe even a Jor-El suit with some clothing choices from Krypton that maybe you could suit up in. The Man of Steel suit from the movie, you want to have the Christopher Reeve costume as well. Maybe even reference other video games like the Injustice series. Have the armor from that as well. Another one that I just thought of would be even the Superman Returns. You know, just thinking of things that people would be fans of. And then the other thing is getting into the next topic, but having suits and shirts and ties and stuff for Clark that would be somewhat customizable. So, next thing, the Clark Kent experience. What I think is key to a good superhero game, and something that Marvel's Spider-Man on the PS4 recently showed, was that you can have Peter Parker moments, and you can make that an engaging part of the gameplay and the story, and allow it as time for progression. So with the Clark Kent experience, we're talking about, being able to pick the clothes of your characters key. So we could have different outfits for that. Now, part of the experience, how do we make this not boring? Photography-based challenges, as he is a journalist. You would want to differentiate this gameplay from Lois Lane's gameplay, which is getting ahead of myself, but that's a key note I want to make. Things like finding a place to change into the Superman suit would be key if things go wrong while you're Clark Kent. Photographing certain items could add to the lore tab. So you find something that's trademark, maybe it's a piece of kryptonite, or maybe it's a piece of armor from Lex's suit, whatever it may be, something related to the story. You're scanning in a newspaper article or something like that. Take a photo with your camera, it gets added to the lore tab, and that could also be a place where it connects with the comic book world. And say you took a picture of Lois Lane, it's going to give you a bio on her in the lore screen, all that kind of stuff, and talk about her history within the comic books, whatever. Rating system for getting photos of Superman. You could kind of do the same thing that Spider-Man does, is potentially have the camera on a timer and snapping photos amidst your gameplay. Other key events, getting evidence in some big story could be really interesting. So mainly just essentially looking at Marvel's Spider-Man that came out on the PS4 and looking what they did with the photography segments, where you needed to get evidence for something. of some crime or of some juicy story or whatever it may be. And then also, you know, just getting cool photos of you being a hero and stuff like that. That's cool. Now, with Lois Lane, you could have interactions or potential gameplay, and you would, of course, want to differentiate that. I think I would focus more on her. You know, Clark can be writing articles and taking photos and stuff, but Lois Lane needs to be more of the, you know, writer type thing. So things you could cover. Her famous interview with Superman could be something that maybe the player could, you know, get a photo of from her perspective and essentially take keywords or key phrases to write an article as sort of a mini game. Journalism mini games is basically what I would call this. Like, choose titles of the article: My Night with Superman, or My Interview with Superman. And, you know, different things could affect the perception of Superman, the story, which we'll talk about the perception later. Key sentences sculpting the perception of Superman. Also, you would kind of, you know, maybe just me being a romantic here, but you would want to have the romantic flying scene, which I noticed none of the games have done. Typically in the movies, there's usually a moment where he takes her for a flight, and they usually glide around, and it's fun, and the theme little kind of plays, and it's, you know, they talk, it's romantic, and then he gently brings her back down, and the night's over. So it could be a one-time thing, or it could be, you know, just for the interview. So that could be a really exciting thing, and you could have her sculpt the perception of Superman. So, you know, whether the city's getting pummeled or not, you would have sort of an overall rating system throughout the game of how is Superman perceived? Is he a menace? Is he, you know, our savior? Is he somewhere in between? And so these chance sequences with Clark writing articles about Superman probably and other things, and Lois Lane doing the same, you would have the chance to repair your perception. But you would need to gather enough clues and get enough of a feel and choose the right article titles and maybe pick key sentences that you would put in there and make it a fun mini game that's sort of a little puzzling but not too hard. Also, moving on, we would want to have quick time events. At times, there are things that are very difficult to simulate in the gameplay. I would take the moment from Superman Returns where the plane is crashing and Superman has to get to the nose of the plane and grab it and stop it from crashing. So you could do that as sort of a button mashing quick time event where he would try to grab the wing and you'd push some buttons and then that would fail and then he'd fly up to the nose of the plane. You'd sit there and spin the sticks or mash A or whatever, you know, without making these too redundant or too much heavily relied on. I think you would want to do this sparingly because quick time events are sometimes frowned upon and are sometimes too difficult for certain players depending on accessibility. But I think you want to give the player as much time as possible actually playing as Superman, feeling like they are him. And so that's why you want to have the Clark Kent stuff, because it's key to the character. And I feel like a lot of games just think, oh, that's boring, let's just give him the action as Superman, but then there's no balance. There's no chance to cool down after a big battle and progress the story and, you know, maybe have an overarching thing going on. Okay, so moving on from that, combat. So the first thing I thought of when I thought of combat is Superman would often pick up items and throw them. You know, big propane tank, throw it at a bad guy, blows up, whatever. Even the ability to grab characters and throw them. Or to grapple them and be able to punch them, stuff like that. You would want to have the ability to throw items in the way that Mario throws Bowser in Super Mario 64. You know, he grabs him by the tail and spins him around and then lets go at just the right time and sends him flying. There have been times where Superman has needed to wind up something for a big throw, whether he's throwing a dragon around, or maybe it's a heavy object and he needs to wind it up, get some momentum going so he can throw it. Maybe that could be a type of throw that does more damage than the average throw. Slowed flight when lifting objects, that's kind of a no-brainer. Having several punch and kick combos and stuff. Flight combat would be key, while hovering. Even having something like a speed flight bash is what I would call this. Say you're flying at full speed and you lock onto an enemy and then boom, press the punch button right as you hit the enemy and you do, sort of a bash attack. Other things, the super clap, as I call it, where he claps his hands and it just creates a tremor around and knocks enemies back, just things that are key to Superman, whether it's a big uppercut or, putting his arms together and clasping his hands and bashing them that way. The ability to counter and block attacks is key. Whether he's fighting something big or someone on the ground, controlling his strength and evaluating the threat and, sort of choosing how powerful he's attacking back. Kryptonite would limit your options in some fights, and we'll talk more about that. So Kryptonite, you could control fights, you could raise the stakes, you could limit powers and create tension. Now, you don't want to do this all the time, but you do want to use it maybe as a device throughout the story. Maybe there's a certain radius that's been affected by kryptonite, and you're in there and you're fighting and you lose the ability to fly or something, or you lose some other ability, or you have to fight to stand up with quick time sequences, or movement could be slowed, or you could do things to dramatize the situation. Of course, there's all different types, different colors of kryptonite with different effects, so you have a large breadth to deal with. So you could also limit certain portions of the game to an area using kryptonite, keeping Superman grounded in that area where he would have to resolve that situation, somehow purge that area. The controls it had to be fun to play, easy to fly, which is something that most games have done well, especially Superman Returns. You would want to feel powerful like you do in the Batman Arkham games. Batman feels very comfortable fighting 20 guys and counterattacking multiple people at the same time and delivering big punches and kicks and breaking arms and legs and stuff. You would want Superman to have that. You would want to limit cutscenes. I think we all enjoy a good cutscene or a conversation of some sort, but you want to keep players in the action and feeling powerful like Superman, so you don't want to have cutscenes that are stealing the action when we could have the player in there doing the action or have a quick time event. I talked about flying underwater earlier. It would be slower, and it would be an option for bomb disposal as well, if you didn't have time to fly into space. And a lot of games do have underwater ecosystems, whether you want to work that in as an Aquaman cameo or whatever, you could do that. And but you would want to have some sort of detail to the underwater. You wouldn't want it to just be a bare beach or something. Character cameos. So here we're under the impression that this game nails Superman. It just does it so well. So maybe at some point, maybe not in the first game, you want to keep things pretty tight with the cast and playable characters and stuff. You could have Supergirl, and maybe she's quicker, maybe she's more nimble as a character. Maybe some of her abilities look different or are different in a way. Then you could have other characters that are either playable or maybe they just show up throughout the story. Martian Manhunter, another character that would be somewhat similar in some aspects. Superboy, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash and Batman could show up for cameos, Aquaman, stuff like that. You don't necessarily need to create a Justice League game here, but different people could show up via a voice cameo or they could, actually show up in person, and you could choose whether, it would be cool, much like how Batman has had Nightwing and Robin and Catwoman as playable characters, and even Deathstroke. You could do very much the same for Superman, having similar characters: Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Supergirl, Martian Manhunter, as long as you differentiate their playstyles, which I think is something that's probably more suited for a sequel. Collectibles. So one thing Superman Returns did that was cool was the kitty cats that were collectible. You would just find them on top of buildings and other places and stuff. That's kind of a neat idea. I would keep that. Taking photos of lore items, unlocking suits throughout the story and side quests and stuff like that. You could have all sorts of different collectibles, whether it's different Superman emblems and costumes, and taking photos of certain things, and progression within the story, things like that. Okay, so this is where we get to the tricky part. We're actually flying through this, but the story. I would suggest that the story for such a game not be tied to a movie or a comic book or any other game or any sort of media. I would use that as a way to limit expectations and allow freedom to craft a really good story, and not have to worry about, oh man, are we doing it just like it is in the movie? Does it need to look exactly like that? And then you start compromising, right? And then before you know it, we're fighting a tornado as the end boss. So what I would recommend is that the game starts on Krypton, and maybe you're playing as Jor-El or whoever, and it's a chance to teach you how to play the game, moving around while on the ground, because obviously no one's flying around on Krypton. You teach players how to jump and how to fight, stuff like that. Maybe Jor-El fights Zod, something like that. Starting there as on Krypton as a tutorial, establishing a player's attachment to the home world. We want to create a beautiful world, much like in Man of Steel. They created this rich and beautiful world, and you kind of felt bad that it was getting blown up and destroyed, and you felt bad for Superman's parents, and they sent him away, and they throw Zod in the Phantom Zone. So not to spoil a big movie there, but just you want to capture that and use that later in the story, and use it as a tutorial as well. So establishing those good memories that you play through, and then, if at some point in the story we're fighting Zod, and things get personal, you think back to those moments on Krypton, and it kind of hurts you a little bit, right? Then after doing that, of course, during the Zod fight, you would want to, this would come up, and maybe a cutscene would bring back your time on Krypton and sort of remind you via a cutscene of all the stuff you did there and the sacrifices, and how Jor-El, wanted Clark to be a force of good, whereas Zod is more about recreating Krypton on another planet, and he doesn't care about destroying it. So juggling Krypton versus Earth. So from there, it could time jump to his early career as Superman. Not so early that he's just discovering his powers, but he's confident enough to be Superman and do his thing. It could be his first day at the Daily Planet, his first days at the Daily Planet and stuff like that, and meeting Lois, because I think the interview with Superman could be a really cool thing for the player to experience and establish, and link that to the journalism mini games and stuff like that. So he's confident enough. And the game would start off with you handling petty crimes, natural disasters, saving people, stuff like that. And that would allow you to just get your bearings before we start fighting, some giant Metallo or General Zod or whatever it may be. And good stories, in general, tend to have an overarching mystery, a secret villain, crimes being committed without evidence, things like that. So you'd want to have that. So a good mystery of whether we know General Zod is coming to Earth at some point, or whether it's another villain that's big, or some secret that's going on Earth, some secret project that the government's doing, or whatever, and daily planets on the story, whatever it may be. I think you want something like that to drive the story and to make the journalism part of the game viable. Of course, you'd have fights with side villains after that. All sorts of, mixy spit, like, bizarro, just go through the whole, the whole list of whoever you want to have, your dream team. And I just picture Zod being a good conclusion to the game, stakes being really high, big fight, city getting destroyed, choosing between Earth and Krypton, potential sequel for the other villains, things like that. Already talked about the Lois Lane interview. That would be a key part in the story. Learning to control your powers, minimizing destruction as the game progresses, and it becomes more difficult as the game continues. Bigger threats arise. These big threats arise, and the small crimes can still continue to make the open world exciting. You could still stop a bank robbery or whatever it may be. That can all be decided as we go. That way, the open world, it will always feel like there's something for the player to do. So that's what I think is a good idea for that. So, that kind of covers my guidelines, and I think that is a good starting point for a game, and sort of going through what I feel like a good Superman game would have. And it's like, if it's missing any one of these key categories, the Metropolis health bar, super stamina, powers, the alternate suits, the quick time events, the alter ego, the music, any of the journalism stuff, I mean, you would want to have some things like that. The way the Peter Parker scenes balance the Spider-Man game as well. You would want to have that. So there's a lot of things here, and this is pretty lofty. How do you make a game that's this massive? How do you handle massive destruction? How do you make flying and all these other things? How do you make it fun? How does it work in a modern game, and that game still hold up to the graphical standards that we hold for games like Spider-Man and the Batman Arkham games and stuff? It's very difficult. You would have to go with a studio that already has experience in this realm, that has a lot of capital and people that are passionate about Superman. You'd have to work closely with DC to craft a story and to get a look for how you want to do all this. So is it feasible? Financially, it's probably a little crazy, but I liken some of this to Crackdown. Crackdown is a game where you do feel like a powerful superhero, and I think you would want that for a Superman game. So you would have to think on that budget, but almost even higher in that gameplay style as well. So I think that's really all I have to say at this point. If I have more thoughts on what the ultimate Superman game would be, we'll definitely do another follow-up. But I thank you for listening, and I hope that if you have any suggestions yourself, or if you have any critiques, maybe you'd like to modify some of my thoughts or elaborate on something, we can certainly discuss that more. So please hit us up there in the comments and let me know what you think. This has been the Shackcast Episode 3, the Ultimate Superman Game. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.